Welcome to Freshman Podcast, Episode 2. Today with us, we have Nigel Li, Director of Research Institute at Freshman and a graduate of MGIMO in Georgetown. Nigel also is a freelance author for The Diplomat and Taipei Times. Nigel, we met 3 years ago, and then a common friend of ours from Yale and US, Terrence, introduced us. You gifted me your novel, and 3 years passed, we met again, bumped to each other, and I asked you what would it take me to bring you to Tashkent, actually move to Tashkent and live here. And your response was, I actually wish that you would suggest me that and offer me that. Tell me more, how did you get to that? Because also you had an offer from the Middle Eastern Institute at National University of Singapore. So what was your reasoning? How all of your experiences led you to this decision to move to Tashkent?
Well, first of all, I love Central Asia as a region. It's a underappreciated part of the world. It's only really starting to gain the world's attention. And my job and the process that I was going to take up at NUS as a researcher was to actually focus on Central Asia and what opportunities Singapore would have here in the region. So it didn't really make much sense for me to be sitting in Singapore and writing about the region when I could have an opportunity to actually be here and be part of the change that is happening here in Uzbekistan. So that was really what brought me here. And I love the food, I love learning the language, so it's great to be here.
Yeah, we've just celebrated 1 month, I think, since
that's right.
you came here, and it seems like you don't regret that,
Nope,
that
not
decision.
at all.
And of course, we'll probably have another podcast in some
Sure,
time, and
certainly.
we'll check in again.
Yep.
You know how did that change? But you are in a very unique position because you could experience both styles of education: the post-Soviet education at MGIMO, and the best kind as well.
Yes.
And also at Georgetown. So run us through the differences between those approaches to education, philosophies to education.
So my background, of course, I should say, is that I come from international relations and regional studies, right? So what does that mean? It means studying global politics, how international laws are written, what are the interests that countries have, and how do they cooperate or compete to achieve these their national interests. So that's the background I come from. And of course, MGIMO, the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, and Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, these are institutions that feed their respective countries' ministries of foreign affairs, or the Department of State, and other multilateral organizations, the UN, the World Bank, IMF, so forth. So that was the path that I wanted to follow. And in terms of how I was educated about all this, the post-Soviet system and in MGIMO was very rigid, was very by the book. You had to study the treaties line by line. You could interpret it, and you can have a brief discussion in the classroom, but at the end of the day, the professor is the expert, they're the practitioner, they have the final say in how it is to be interpreted. And so I came out of that system with a lot of historical knowledge, like why was there this certain clause in this treaty? What was the sticking point when the Americans or the Soviets were negotiating it? I knew that. And when I went to Georgetown, my peers, they knew the basic idea of why there was a conflict or how it was resolved, but they don't know those sticking points and how some of those issues were kicked down the road and has planted the seeds for current ongoing disagreements between countries. So they don't know that, and their worldview is very limited to what America's interests are, and also the past, say, 20 years. But the Russians have this ability to go, and the Russians and the Chinese, and I think even in Central Asia too, this ability to have this historical depth and to look back not even 50 or 100, but thousands of years. So that's, I think, one thing I took away from Russia. From Georgetown, however, the concept of this liberal arts education that, yes, you might learn all these things about global affairs, but your job isn't only just to go to the State Department, but it's to actually go to the State Department and make a difference and be a positive contributor to American foreign policy or whatever organization you join. So there's that mission behind it. Whereas at MGIMO, it's more like this is the one step you have to fulfill to achieve that career dream you have to work in the ministry. Whereas at Georgetown, it's less so of what the professor is saying that is the final say. It's the students actually that contribute, and it's in seminars, for example, your professor sits back, and it's the students that
moderates the discussion.
Yep.
And it can be really frustrating.
It can be because sometimes maybe one of your classmates didn't do the reading, and they're just making up stuff, and it sounds convincing. And the Americans have a way of like sounding really smart and very charismatic.
There's no substance.
Yes,
basically.
there's no substance,
Yeah.
and then everyone's like, "Oh, that's a great contribution. Yes, yes, yes." But I'm just sitting there like, okay.
And it's very supportive
yes,
as well, right? It's
that's
validating.
True. It's true.
So very rarely you
Yep.
would hear someone say, "Oh, that's complete nonsense."
Yes.
Whereas in the post-Soviet system, you
Yep.
can be told very straightforwardly
Yes.
that what you're saying.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Which has its pluses
Yeah,
and
exactly,
minuses,
exactly.
right? Because on one hand, you create a more collaborative environment, a welcoming environment. The other is, well, facts are facts, and you can't make that up. To summarize really these experiences in two sentences, in Russia, we are taught how the world is, very realist view of the world. In America, it's how the world should be. It's a very optimistic thing, like we can shape and reshape the world. So that's the main takeaway, I think, from my education in these two countries.
Interesting. And the way it seems like that the U.S. teaches how the world is through frameworks, through certain ways of seeing the world. So not
true.
necessarily against information, but through those theories.
Yes,
right?
yeah, like constructivism,
Or
liberalism,
realism, yeah,
and they acknowledge realism, which is basically in the theory of international relations that power is what drives the countries to decide their national interests. Whereas like people who believe in or follow more constructivist view, it's like, well, the international economy, these global institutions, these are created to generate a certain behavior between countries. And so the Americans for a long time have always believed in that. That's why the post-World War II order was an American-led one. I think with Russia, their worldview, at least what was taught at the university, at MGIMO, was yes, power and economic power, military power, and cultural, civilizational legacies are what drives a country forward. Whereas with America, it's much more.
It's very argumentative,
Yes,
right? It's
yes. You make the
you can
case for
defend,
it,
and
yes.
especially if your professor is a proponent of a certain school, you can still get a good grade if you made a very
Yes,
interesting case
yes.
and a good argument.
Yes.
Whereas in the post-Soviet space, there are always some ways in which
Yes.
you're supposed to approach your essays and your arguments, and then
I
those end up getting
won't
good
get
grades.
I won't get into politics, but yes, I did get a lower grade because I said something which was a debatable topic. But it did not align with what the professor believes in, and I got a lower grade because of that. Yeah, so it happens.
Really
but that would never happen really in Georgetown for sure.
It reminds me of that phrase in the 90s that was very, very popular, especially at that time, where you would find a job and then the first phrase that they would tell you is forget everything that you learned in the university. And then to me as also a student of liberal arts, it's very, very difficult to forget what we learned there. Because it's the way you think, it's the critical thinking. And as abstract as it may sound, it's not something that can't be forgotten because it's the approach. And this is something that we will be talking about today because ultimately the creation of the Freshman Research Institute is partly about teaching research, but also partly it's about the values and method, the scientific methods that we plan to spread. What about this method, this scientific method, that makes it such a powerful tool to learn about the world and explore the world and analyze what's around us, with such an abundance of information around us?
I think what the aim of the Research Institute is that we're not trying to just work on one project where like a student's interested in economics and okay, sure, let's just hone in on that. Here are sources, read it, write about it. No, it's actually a habit. I would even go as far to be more simplistic about it. It's not a science, it's just a habit. That is, if you're curious about something, what are the first steps you do to actually engage with it? What kind of news do you read about it? What are the latest developments? What kind of popular books are there out there to basically soften your brain to be more receptive of new information about the topic? Learn how to basically create your own curriculum, right? Then from there, find that depth and engage with these individual experts who've written more complex books, and then follow their work, and then find that niche, how that relates to your community, a problem that you observe, and write about it. That's really the heart of the process. And it can apply for so many different things, whether it's actually STEM related or humanities or social sciences, whatever. It works. It works. It's a framework. And I think schools fail to teach that, not just in Uzbekistan. I think in other countries as well.
Why do you think that's the case? Because it seems like everyone can benefit from critical thinking in a large capacity, but it seems like most of the public approaches to education, they don't teach what you would learn at the liberal arts system. And then I talked about it with the dean of Yale College, Dean Pericles, and then I hypothesized that that approach to critical thinking, liberal arts overall, it has a little bit of that elitist dimension to it. Would you agree with that? Do you think that it should be democratized? That this is those approaches should not be just limited to those institutions where you would pay $100,000 per year to study at, and this is something that we can integrate into the public schooling system?
I want them to be integrated in a public schooling system for sure. But the thing is, with liberal arts education and universities in general, they started off as elite institutions. There were clubs for wealthy people, families, powerful families to gather and maintain that kind of system. But of course, over time, it's democratized, and the society started to recognize that we need a more meritocratic system. And so that's been the direction that it's been going. And of course, there are issues within the system. And that's why we are here to try to get students to be aware of these pitfalls and how do they prepare themselves for that, right? How do they prepare their profiles for that? Within the public school system, whether in Uzbekistan or any other country, those that have stuck to very traditional methods of teaching, this system is a legacy of the Industrial Revolution, right? Why is there a school bell? Why is everyone arranged in rows? It's because it's like a factory line. And so they work, do their math problems, whatever, just as if they were, assembling semiconductors. I don't know. I mean, now robots do that, I guess. But then, then the bell rings. Oh, it's break time. Okay, then you turn off your brain. And then, bell rings again. Okay, go back to work. It's very Pavlovian. And that's how really the public school system started off, is how do you condition people to turn on and off their brain, right? And engage with what they have to do. But things have changed, of course, and like the European schools have changed. I was very lucky that in my school in Singapore, the Singapore American School, they tried to break down a lot of these legacies, and I guess that's why I turned out the way I have, and taken more like unconventional routes with my professional development. But I think if we show them through the work that we're doing at the Research Institute and within Uzbekistan, hopefully that will start to inspire other universities definitely as well, universities, schools here in this country. Mm-hmm.
Also, partly, at least to some extent, it is a factor of logistics and professionals who need to teach all of those skills. And there are very few people who went through that system in the first place, who had the privilege of studying at liberal arts institutions in some way. So I think there's that as well. And education, it seems like the liberal arts system, and I would encourage everyone who is viewing to read more into it, because it's so much deeper than just simply your ability to pick different classes and then construct your education aligned with your interests. But also it's some values. Like, for example, a big one in science is to consider the opposite view. which I feel that in Uzbekistan, we can talk more about it, some mindset shift that needs to happen in students where we're so adamant about our position that we invest so many resources in trying to build our argument around what we believe in, but then almost at no point we sit back and ask ourselves, what is the best counter-argument to what we're trying to what
yeah, I
address.
think that...
And then biases and so many other things that we need to look into.
Yeah, I think it's a legacy of many things: history and culture, and acceptance of authority. And this is not just observable here; it's observable in many other Asian countries as well. So to even entertain the idea of entertaining the opposite view means that you have to admit that partially that you might be wrong.
You might be wrong,
right?
yeah.
And that diminishes your legitimacy or authority. That can be completely uncomfortable for a lot of people, for whether it's professors to politicians, whatever. So I don't know how that will start. Maybe that will start within institutions like what we're trying to create. I think also I observe this in some other universities as well. It's boiling here. It's happening, but it's something we have to keep pushing for sure.
Yeah. And also the idea of certainty of knowledge, right? And I think as a scientist, to some extent, we need to contend with the fact that a lot of things are really not that certain. And even if you have a strong argument, in social sciences, people are very careful about the word proof and proving, right? Because again, there are so few things that we can be certain about, even if the evidence is there, which of course creates another problem, which is that you might become cynical almost, and you might question almost everything. And that's a stage in the liberal arts education that we see from time to time, a young mind coming in and starts questioning everything. Some of the things that hold society together, some of the foundational principles about how things ought to be. And what do you think about that? Is there another side of that questioning, of this analysis that might be difficult psychologically to grapple with as a young person?
I think every young person who really delves into this process of learning more about how society is structured, learning more about psychology and how values are shaped, will face that moment for sure. The challenge is, how do you get yourself out of it? And I think that's, of course, the limitation of pure rationalism, pure like positivist thinking, is that everything can be shaped, everything can be explained. But I think the ideal situation is where you have a bit of both, where you do appreciate there are some natural laws, there are some higher values that are a mystery. Whether it's faith, religion, or some kind of
spirituality.
Sure. Whatever it may be for the individual, to leave that open as well, because inherently that's part of the liberal arts experience, right? Your adoption of pure rationality might be wrong too, so you need to leave that door open for the possibility where you might be wrong. Yeah.
Thank you for this discussion. Again, very few people, and it's almost immediately that you understand that people experience liberal arts when you start talking about those things. So it is a big privilege. Now moving back to Earth and back to freshman office, you have talked with a lot of young people in Uzbekistan, Central Asia, more broadly. And then you have spent a lot of time out of this month at the freshman office, where we see some of those young talents and from different fields and with different passions and interests. And what was your impression of those young minds? And then what do you feel that we're lacking, that we need to, maybe it's a value, or again, that mindset shift that we need to, so tell us more about that experience.
Well, I would say that what these students lack is less than what they have. So I think it's a good challenge, right? It's very minor things that I think can be solved if the right resources and time is given to address these concerns. We went to me and Amirbek, who was on the first podcast. We visited the University of World Economy and Diplomacy. We also visited New Uzbekistan University. So one was a IR, econ school, the other more STEM engineering focus. So these are two different worlds, right, within the field of higher education. But what I was inspired by was that everyone had this sense that they could contribute and do something for the country. And it wasn't a means to an end to get out of Uzbekistan and go to another university or find a job overseas, so forth. Because I think there's a clear policy direction where the country recognizes, the government recognizes that these young students from Uzbekistan have a role to play in society and can positively contribute to society. So that's good. That's good. I think that's key for any student who needs direction in life, because I think that's the one thing that a lot of people struggle with. In fact, not even just when you're a student, at any stage in your life. The challenge, I think, is still these institutional legacies of how the authority is organized within the university. We had some issues organizing some events sometimes because maybe the administration was skeptical of who we were, what we wanted to do, why were we talking about research or critical thinking. Like that's not part of their curriculum, that doesn't belong there. Or maybe they just didn't manage to find, right, a slot for us to talk. But that happens, right? But if perhaps more power or leeway was given to students to be more organic with how they want to organize these events or engage with people outside of their universities, I think that would really actually inspire them to take more responsibility, and from that early point recognize that their role to play is already right now as a student, not just after. And so that's my hope, I think.
I think part of the challenge is that those institutions see students in universities not as full adults, but still people who need to be supervised.
Sure.
And there's very little freedom still in some places. In some places there's already more, and it's changing, and there's this transformative process. But another challenge, of course, is the prioritization sometimes is a bit off. Like we hold these discussions about sort of the length of someone's socks, right? Or how someone is supposed to show up at the university, and then what should be the color of your, I don't know, suit and stuff. Sure. Which is, of course, all of it is super secondary.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing as well. Another difference between MGIMO and Georgetown, like in MGIMO, this was what we're wearing is the uniform. And you have to.
Exactly.
Because it's a diplomatic school. It's part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and again, you never know what kind of guests are going to appear. Mm-hmm. With Georgetown, people in like sweatpants or pajamas. They'll just go there to their lecture, and sure, I mean that's a different way of doing things, and it does create a more relaxed environment. It depends on who fits into these environments, but more thought, I think, in these institutions that are more strict is spent on things that I think maybe might not be necessary. Yeah.
And there's not less discipline. I think there's this idea that those two things are somehow connected, that if you're coming in your suit, right, and you're looking great to the university, that somehow that affects your performance, which I don't know, from our experience.
Yeah, looks aren't everything.
Literally, like, and those are the things that I noticed compared to Singapore, and maybe that is something we can address as well. The change from Singapore to Uzbekistan, for both of us, actually. And for me, Singapore has given me so much. And it was such a necessary, interesting experience. Yale and US as that experiment between Yale University and National University of Singapore. And it was a one-of-a-kind kind of school. And of course, it's very regrettable that the project, it made its impact on National University of Singapore, which became a lot more liberal artsy in some ways. But I felt that I think Yale and US could have done a lot more. What are some of the things that you're seeing, the differences between Singapore and Uzbekistan so far when it comes to education? I mean, there's a lot, of course, but if we focus on education specifically.
I think Uzbekistan is catching up to where Singapore was, say, maybe 20, 30 years ago, or even maybe after the first decade of our independence. So we became independent in 1965, so around the 1970s, there was a clear direction to invest more in STEM, in skills-based learning, right? Mm-hmm. So if this university is just for technicians, for engineers, programmers, etc. That's what NTU, that's what NUS was really going towards, medicine, doctors, etc. So what emerged after that few decades was we have a very large pool of these experts, these technicians, who can then contribute to adding value to the economy. And I think Uzbekistan is investing in that right now. That's why there's I think, greater focus on STEM-related fields and less so on, say, humanities, liberal arts education,
Social
right?
sciences,
It's not, it just doesn't fit the national agenda or direction. And I understand that. Whereas in Singapore now, they're realizing we haven't invested in our arts, our culture. We've not supported that enough. We've turned a lot of people away from it. And now we're looking back and say, okay, yes, we're wealthy, we're successful, we have these many doctors, lawyers, scientists, but where are our musicians? Where are our jazz musicians? Where are our artists? All the paintings that we have. The National Museum is great. Our gallery is great, but it doesn't inspire the way, say, the Met in New York does, or the many museums in Europe does, right? So I think we're focusing on that now. But I hope that it's not too late, but part of me fears that it will take a long, long time to reverse some of that very aesthetic, very practical, pragmatic approach that Singapore has taken in terms of education. So Uzbekistan is going that direction, but I think there is a benefit here that Uzbekistan has such a large population. And so for us, we had to really make sure that every person would be a GDP multiplier. Whereas in Uzbekistan, I think, I'm sure everyone will contribute more along the way, but there's not that great necessity and pressure to make it so that everyone will double or quadruple the GDP output of the country. Yeah.
In the case of Uzbekistan, 600,000 students enter the schooling system as first graders every year.
That's a lot.
So I think initially the idea was, okay, let's just keep them busy. Let's just offer the different pathways, and that was the initial push. Right now we're a lot more strategic about it, and we've seen some success, say, in the world of soccer and then football.
Yeah. Or chess.
Husanov,
Yeah.
and then chess, of course, Sindarov is just... Yeah, he's just
Really
dominated
impressive,
the candidates tournament. And there are just many pathways in which people can be successful. There were also, I just started following them, just a couple of dudes from somewhere in Uzbekistan, just recording them playing on different instruments and then blowing up on the internet. So there are different pathways in which you can be successful. And of course, in Singapore, there are so many geniuses, and then Singapore is topping every ranking when it comes to education, IQ, and so on and so forth. But it seems to me that those geniuses end up more often than not at Deloitte, at Goldman Sachs, and not that they don't make their impact there. Of course they do, and they're driving the banking system or consulting or all of those, like you said, sort of economically high output industries. But it seems that there's just a lot more diversity in terms of the talent that Singapore could have supported. Yeah. There are so many ways in which Singapore, and that also brings me back to my experience when it comes to entrepreneurship. Singapore, for some time, it gave away a lot of money for entrepreneurial projects, and at some point, I think that what happened was people started looking at the numbers, and the numbers were not great. Sort of the KPIs or sort of the return on investment was not that apparent, because that's how startups work, right? You invest in 100 startups, and if like a couple of them become successful, but that's in many ways not how Singapore does things. If Singapore invests, it must be successful.
Yes,
it needs to be.
Yes.
Has to be, right?
Yes, it's a chicken and egg problem, right?
Yeah.
Like in order for us to support you, you have to be successful. But
in the first place,
yeah.
But
how can I be successful? You don't support me. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's the difference. But of course, Singapore operates within the constraints that it is in terms of population, in terms of also being a city-state. And then Uzbekistan has just a lot more ground to just invest, and let's see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, Tashkent, Singapore is twice the size of Tashkent. Yeah. So that's the kind of land we're working with, and the space. So yes, you said 600,000 students enter the schooling system every year. The Singaporean population is about 6.7 or so million. So
Yeah.
that's like a tenth, right?
Yeah.
Of just crazy, right?
When I left Uzbekistan, I think our population was around 33 million. I think right now we're nearing 40
Yes,
million.
that's right, somewhere around
So
there.
basically
Yeah,
every
yeah.
year.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's so exciting because there are so few places in the world where this is happening. And it seems like if you look into Japan, if you look into Europe, and US, of course, balances that through immigration. There's so few places that are net positive when it comes to birth rates and
That's
so
right.
on.
Yeah, Singapore has a declining birth rate, a replacement rate of 0.79. Japan, Korea, South Korea, they're having those issues as well. China, aging population. With Europe, there's also a demographic crisis as well. America, needless to say, it has its things it needs to deal with. So, yeah, I think Uzbekistan is actually very well placed, and that's why I've been meeting so many different stakeholders, like from the IT park, for example. Their goal is to make Uzbekistan a outsourcing like hub, so
Yes.
like companies will outsource labor here, and I think it's actually a really good idea because educated individuals here speak English, Russian, Uzbek, and many I'm learning are learning Chinese as well, and of course maybe another language, maybe Arabic or a European language. So it's like perfectly placed to be that center. Yeah.
Just yesterday, I spoke with Mohammad Kadir, who is, again, very young man from Uzbekistan who did a program at San Francisco. And it was, I don't want to make a mistake, Silk Road Business Accelerator. And he was really captured by that sort of environment and the resources and opportunities in San Francisco. And we talked about what Uzbekistan can offer. And I think, I don't know if I managed to convince him, at least in some way, but I think that, sure, we don't have that big of a market here yet in terms of purchasing power, and then millions of people ready to buy the products that you invested millions, hundreds of millions sometimes in making. But also the costs are much lower. It is generally safer. And yes, the lack of trained talents is something that we're actively overcoming. So it seems like in San Francisco, yes, there are people once in a while who become incredibly successful. And right now, probably it's not the best time to judge because it's definitely a bubble, and then a bunch of people are making millions. And when you see that, you think that that's how it is. But of course, it's waves. But it seems like so many fields are already taken, and that's how I feel in Singapore as well. That it's so competitive in almost anything because Singapore had so much time to develop it that as a new person it's very, very difficult to break into and start something new. Do you feel like this is a good reason to come to places like Uzbekistan, that you can start things the way people started things in the 80s, 90s in Singapore?
Yeah, that's again one of the main reasons why I wanted to move here, because I'm one of the few Singaporeans. I've not met another Singaporean who lives here. I bumped into some tourists. I know there are some people in some universities teaching, but yes, it's so overly saturated in these very developed countries, and your contribution, if you want to make a contribution, you have to work 100 times harder than everyone else. But here, your contribution just by being here can be transformative, and by engaging, and of course that requires you to engage and to learn from others and to understand the local context better. There's a lot of effort behind that, but I think that pays off real quickly. When it comes to, you were mentioning, starting these ideas and a business, I think here the way that they're attracting foreign talent as well to try to bring companies here, like through the IT park, for example, and I know they're developing this financial center.
Yes.
It's actually quite impressive, and I think with where the world is going right now, where the traditional centers of economic power are being tested, whether economically, geopolitically, or militarily, Central Asia placing itself in this manner gives options, and businessmen like options. They want to hedge their risks, right? So if Uzbekistan is one of those places where they can find some kind of safety and security and certainty, I think that's a great thing, and I'm sure that's behind the policy calculations of the government.
I mean, human development is definitely one of the priorities right now of wherever we're going. And it's very, very clear that for us to achieve what we plan to achieve, we need to have a fundamentally different level of expertise in different fields. And now, as you're working with students who will be potentially leading in those industries, is there any advice or anything that immediately apparent to you about how you should go about this process?
Right.
So, for example, my advice would be to start reading into whatever the field that you are pursuing. I just had a student that was really funny to an extent because he told me that he wants to pursue sociology, and then I asked, "What have you done within the sociology field?" And his response was, "Oh, I'm managing a team at some random NGO," and for him, sociology was anything related to society. And I think it's interesting that people even start figuring these things out, but of course, reading into those fields is the first step, and trying to carve out a niche within it as well. Because sociology, business, and economics, they're such massive fields, and there are so many ways you can pursue them. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
So I wanted to say people should read more. I do think that we talked earlier about a challenge that young students have here. I think the challenge, is access to more books. I think the bookstores, I'm a lover of books and bookstores, nice bookstores. I have the great privilege of living in Singapore, in America, and of course Moscow too, where the book culture there is so well developed, and in the stores there you can get anything. Here it's a bit more limited with choices, and I guess of course it's a more difficult market now because people can just get things digitally or learn from social media and so forth. So I think if there's one thing, maybe encouraging students to seek out those books, whether digitally or if they can find it physically or ordering it online and so forth. Really investing that time to read, and money. Of course, it takes a bit of money to read. Find a book that might be difficult to get, for sure. But the second is, don't chase false idols. Like, just because, say, Elon Musk is someone who's very successful, or we think is successful, like, you need to emulate who that person is, or so many different, like, life coaches. I don't even want to say their names, but I'm sure you and our listeners will know. Just, you need to chart your own course, number one. Number two, you need to think deeply about what exactly matters to you and who you want to be and how you want to achieve that, right? It's not shaped by what other people say or do. And sure, if you want to become an AI expert, like the people in Anthropic or OpenAI, whatever, but sure, go ahead, but do the homework, right? Learn more about how these systems work, or learn what the current regulations are and the challenges that these companies are facing in getting more investment, or what are the technical limitations, or the societal impact that they have. Like, find those broader, deeper questions to answer, not just, oh, I'm interested in AI, or I'm interested in sociology. That takes effort. That kind of knowledge is very surface level, but it takes effort to precisely take the time to read and to listen to different viewpoints, or to, maybe watch a documentary about these things. Like, that takes time, right? And information is not something that can be churned out in 5 seconds, right? From, say, a ChatGPT thing, and then you just learn what that stupid robot thinks, right? I mean, I'm not a huge fan of AI, but yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about that
Sure.
as well. Yeah, and it's so fascinating that I think people more and more realize that probably AI is not going to replace humans in the near future, and it's very interesting that when you start asking AI to comment on things that you are very knowledgeable in, you start understanding that it doesn't know much.
It doesn't. Exactly.
So, yeah.
And I refuse to also, like, correct them, because if I correct them, then they're gonna get smarter too.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I think the thing of course, I don't take the most extremist Luddite position that we should, like, pull the plug.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
like, if its ability to, like, process big data sets and so forth, or give, like, a perspective on certain things, sure, I think it as a tool. But if you're using it solely as a means to learn more, study, or research, or to write, it's very, very dangerous for our lectures, we included like the study, right? I can't remember the numbers, but people who used AI are more likely to have lower brain activity of the information that they process, and hence less more difficulty to recall this information. So research is like going around like the forest and like collecting mushrooms, for example, right? You are doing it yourself, and you come back with that basket of mushrooms or berries or whatever. Like that is yours. But if you outsource it to this large language model, you might not get what you want. Maybe they might even collect some poisonous berries or mushrooms, right? And that would be deleterious to your knowledge and research and development. So that's why I think being in control of how you process your information, how you research, what you research, that is very important.
Yeah, I mean, the mushroom analogy is very interesting,
Yeah,
especially
I just came up with that.
in code, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like it started as, oh, we'll replace sort of the authors and writers and so on. And now it's more and more looking like that the technology is most promising with code. And then there's just the output of those machines is so massive that you just don't have the time to check what's going on there. And that editing process is extremely important for coders.
Yes.
And you just don't have the, like, there's so many mushrooms, so to speak,
Yes,
right?
yes.
That you don't even have the time and the capacity to know which ones are poisonous. And then you would know, like, after the fact. And of course, we know about,
And
say,
another thing, right? Like that, precisely that knowledge of what are the problems, what is poisonous, what's not. I saw a very interesting comment on LinkedIn is that right now, people are not hiring junior staff because they think that junior staff are replaceable with AI, right?
Yeah.
And this is, of course, a decision that comes from the top. And of course, the top have years of experience because they were trained within the institution. But they are actually harming this pipeline where, say, 10, 15 years from now, who's going to replace those decision makers on top? Nobody. Like AI is not going to be able to do that. Or at least, well, I don't know if it can do that. That we're in a very dangerous matrix-like world. But the point is that if humans still need to be in the process, you're not going to pass down that knowledge. And knowledge, if you really start from the beginning of like how history works, right? Oral history, we share our history of our tribe and so forth around the campfire through music and poems, right? And then through books now and movies. And if you don't pass that knowledge down from human to human, you are actually breaking a very fundamental aspect of knowledge transfer. Yeah.
Another thing with AI is, of course, when students use it. And we've seen this a lot when it comes to research and when it comes to writing. And I think that both of us were in a very privileged position because we studied without AI.
Yes.
And it really puts us in a very, very interesting position where we know how to direct it and prompt it, and we can take the most value out of it, whereas people who never went through that system. And I was, when I joined Yale and US, I had 2 gap years. I also studied at Samarkand College of Light Industry and Economy, where I never studied in English. So I never wrote an essay in my life in English outside of SATs and IELTS. And when I came into that system, I remember just sitting there and being stuck on an essay and not knowing what to write. And it's such a frustrating moment, but it's a moment that breaks you. And I've seen my classmates have the same experience. It's almost a traumatizing experience, but traumatizing partly in a good way as well, because you learn how to figure things out yourself.
Exactly.
And right now there's this temptation to just go to it and just ask how to, and where to start. And sometimes the moment of being stuck is incredibly
That's right. It's
important.
right. I think being in those moments is like being thrown in the deep end of the pool and then teaching yourself how to swim, right? I think right now we're throwing them into the pool with like the floaties on the wings, the floating wings, and then we say, oh, good job, you can swim, right? But that's not true. And this is very evident with students that I've worked with, who used heavily these tools to write their essay, and then, okay, sure, wow, interesting concepts that you've written about. Like, can you explain it to me in your own words? Like, and I take away the essay so they can't read it, and they don't even know what they wrote because, of course, they didn't write it. And this is so dangerous because if let's say you're preparing for internship opportunities or even admissions interviews, if let's say you convincingly manage to manipulate it so that it looks like you wrote it, and you're a viable candidate for this opportunity, and the person interviews you, and they're like, "Oh, tell me more about this project you did," and you have no idea how to expand on it. It's such a big, huge giveaway of like what that you didn't do it, and your credibility is tarnished. You've lost out on opportunity. You could have spent this time to maybe, in fact, all your other aspects of your profile, your grades, your extracurriculars were perfect, but they just saw this, and that anything that can tarnish that reputation is so disadvantageous for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that it's not even swimming in any way. It's sort of swimming in virtual reality,
Sure,
where
that's true, actually.
it's total outsourcing of thinking,
Yeah.
which is so dangerous. Nigel, we started Freshman Research Institute, and it targets different age groups, all the way. I mean, who's the youngest that we have right now?
We
who's
have,
right-
I think, a ninth grader or 10th grader.
10th
Yeah,
grader.
Yeah, ninth or 10th grader.
And
yeah.
we were, I think I asked you this question, what is the earliest age where people can do their research? And I think we talked about 13, 14 or
Sure,
something, or
sure.
even
Yeah.
younger than that.
I would even say younger, but of course for the limited time that we can work with these students, I think, yeah, around that age. But I think the one thing that our generation of, like when we were in school, and I know when I was in school, my most favorite time of the week was when we go to the library. And this was when I was like in primary school, and you can pick out a book that you want to read or what you were curious about. Like we didn't really have Google, like we didn't have access to computers that much, right? So already we were trained knowing that if you want to read or learn more about something, you read a book, or you go on these like certain like learning websites that would tell you more about it. So I think inculcating that kind of process and those values in younger students, the younger they are, the better. But it's research can begin at any time, and we're also working with university level students who are trying to catch up to this level. So, yeah, that's.
But the question that those students often have is what me,
yes,
as or what I as a 13, 14, 15-year-old can contribute to science, because a big part of the scientific exploration is identifying a gap in the knowledge and contribute in some way. It might be a very, very small way. It might be taking a framework that worked in one paper and was used, let's say, in Kazakhstan, and you bring it to Uzbekistan. It might be just that. But still, it's the contribution. So, and it's a question that I heard people ask you as well,
Yes.
students ask you.
Yes.
So what would be your reply to those who are skeptical about their
Yeah.
ability to contribute in any way to scientific exploration?
Well, some will have it easier than others, for sure. Some have maybe a very already set niche on a topic, and already know what they want to do. Some might still need to explore. But in general, everyone has something to contribute because they have a set of experiences, a life story, history, upbringing that is different from everyone else's. So if they are to identify a societal problem, or even whether it's to be solved through policy or scientifically, through a technology, only they know what is the problem. And the programs that we run is to help them identify that. And some have been doing really well. Some require a bit more work, but that's the beauty of the program, is that we tailor it to each one when we work with them individually. But I would say in general, everyone has something to contribute, but it's more of taking the time and putting in the effort to do that homework, to read, right? If you don't know your field, you don't know how you're going to contribute to it. So that comes first, actually. Yeah.
I know the answer to this question, but it's still a very popular one. Do you tell people which research question they need to pursue?
No, I don't.
And why not?
Because if I do that, I'm no different from ChatGPT, for example, right? Just write me a research question on an economics problem. Yeah, I will have my set of biases, experience that I would then be imposing, right, on the student. But of course, I will help the student shape it to be more specific, right? But ultimately, it's up to them what specific topic they want to choose. So that has to be the direction of the student, and the student has to care about the topic in order to want to read more about it every day and make it a habit to do that reading. Yeah.
And that is, in fact, something that I'm noticing oftentimes is that our educational system, and I'm also coming from public school system in Uzbekistan, it really tells you oftentimes exactly how you need to do something, whether it's writing a referat, which is essentially this. Back in the day, we used to just download Wikipedia pages to
and rewrite it.
Yeah, and rewrite it, and sometimes without even writing it, to basically show that we've done our homework.
I did have a professor in Moscow who couldn't speak English very well. He was a sociology professor, and he was just reading off a piece of paper on a topic, sociological topic. And then one of my classmates pulled up the Wikipedia page about it, and we realized he was reading the Wikipedia page straight up.
Yeah, we have this special relationship with Wikipedia for some reason. But and it's very interesting that in the approach of students, oftentimes you would join a consultation, and they would be
tell me what to do.
Perform,
yes.
in a sense, tell me what to do. And then you start asking them questions, and then they're really confused about why you're so interested in what they want. Or because the system,
what do I know?
The system, especially the one that we're zoning out and transforming from, it really would never ask a question of what do you want. It always imposed its own set of questions that you needed to pursue. How valuable do you think is to shake it off a little bit and then basically?
It needs to be done.
Yeah.
It's not even how valuable. It's an imperative. It's a necessity. We have to do that. And there are many students that flourish in that, but with some you kind of need to work with them and coach them through it. So this is a lot of reverse engineering we have to do, but that's what the research institute is set up to do. And I see this as well in the admissions program as well, right? Asking them who they are, what values they have, and especially in a country where talking about these things is sometimes taboo or too sensitive. But when you realize that, when you open up the conversation, you realize all the students are actually going through the same process of self-discovery, and there's nothing to be shameful about it or embarrassed about it, right? And that's, I think, how we make a more inclusive society. That's how we make a more a society that is more articulate about who they are, and as such, the better they are able to communicate the challenges they face, the better they are able to share these ideas with people in power who actually might want to listen to what their concerns are. But as long as we live in these societies that retain and hold back on sharing our thoughts, our criticisms, our praises, or only sharing praises, then the people in charge are always going to keep the course that they're going down. Yeah.
And it's a very unique period of our country's history where there's a demand for feedback. Demand for feedback, which is there, but then it's not oftentimes well informed, or it's not presented in a way that will be well researched, or there will be evidence supporting those claims. But the demand is there.
Yes.
So
that's why what we're doing here is we're raising the capacity, this research capacity, where these students know how to prepare a research paper or a report on any topic. And right now, so much of the information space about reforms in this country or within Central Asia is dominated by experts from the West who are bringing their own experience and their own biases, which again are not invalid, but it's just that we need to have a greater say of domestic voices because people here are the ones who endure the consequences, whether positive or negative, of any of these changes. So we don't want the KPMGs, the McKinseys, the think tanks in Washington to be the one who dominate the conversation, but it needs to be also a strong voice here domestically in Uzbekistan. Yeah.
It's very interesting because I think that's another challenge that I also feel largely in our work, which is that a student would come in and then they would ask you what they should do. So, Valera, should I take a gap year or not?
Right.
Or should I pursue business or should I pursue? And I realized that those questions oftentimes they come from the position of, I would want to outsource this decision to you. So if this decision is mistaken, if let's say in a year I realized that taking a gap year was wrong, but you told me to take it, then what would happen is that I could always sort of blame the person who I
Yes.
asked. And then there's still, we're learning how to take accountability of the decisions that we individually make. Is it something that you've noticed in any extent?
Yes, I think this is definitely observable in many like levels of society within the post-Soviet space. Some have been lucky because of geography, like the Baltic states, for example, or the post-socialist states of Eastern Europe. But for example, Russia itself struggled with its privatization reforms and all because they were just following what the West and Washington is saying, here's what you have to do. And the result of that was a very difficult time, right, during the 90s, and the legacy of that overshadowing everything that has happened in that country. And I think with Central Asia, there's natural caution because with Uzbekistan only recently having the opportunity to privatize and to open up the economy for foreign investment, they've seen what other countries have been doing. And yet still, the entities that are advising the decision makers here are the ones that come from the West. And of course, there is a natural trust towards that because they have the experience, but I think people in Uzbekistan need to also think more about what are the consequences for these decisions. Again, they can be good or bad, but they need to have a greater say. And I don't want Uzbekistan to be in a position 10 years from now where they said, oh, we shouldn't have made this choice on whatever policy decision just because we followed what these people who we paid to advise us on this topic, their advice turned out to not be helpful. So if we can mitigate some of that by having a more locally grown talent and more inclusive environment in that space, I think then we would have achieved something.
Yeah. And also part of it is the mindset shift in knowing that we can contribute to the world. Because I see, and it might be just a simple correlation, but I think there's a causal relationship between the way Silk Road operated and how prosperous it was throughout history, and then how prosperous Uzbekistan was and Central Asia overall. And it seems that with the maritime Silk Road, Uzbekistan became on the fringe of fringes of decision making, of science, of technology. And now, as we're re-entering it through again the re-emergence of Silk Road and becoming relevant again, then we also psychologically start realizing that hey, we can be a part of that discussion. We're not just simply on the sidelines, that we can be. And I think more and more students feel that. And definitely the reforms that we're seeing, they definitely help because people listen and people want to hear constructive ideas to be able to drive reforms further.
Yeah. That's that. I observe that too. I think in the next 10, 20 years, Central Asia's importance geographically is going to grow, and all the investments that we're seeing coming in, not just from China, but from Europe and America, and developing these logistic routes, is going to only heighten the strategic importance of the region. And so a lot will hinge on that, for sure. Yeah.
Nigel, we'll of course continue our conversation both at the office and then hopefully we'll have another episode. And by the way, I think some of the next episodes you'll be the host yourself.
I'll be delighted.
Speaking with some of the decision makers and people and continuing the discussion that we started. One last question that I also asked Amir Bek in the previous episode: what is one book that?
Oh dear.
And I know that there are so many. But if you had to highlight, let's say, to high schoolers today, anything that you can think of, sort of a staple that they absolutely need to read.
Wow, I wish I could ask to pause the recording so I could think about it. But no, first thing that comes to mind is Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I don't know if you've read it, Catcher in the Rye. It's a very short book. It's a coming-of-age story of like a kid who basically runs away from school. He kind of gets kicked out of it, but the story is told through his own like narration, like a mind of a teenager, and he wanders around New York and he's trying to do things that maybe a teenager shouldn't be doing, but then he realizes after all what it means to be someone growing up. And it's an easy read, and it's a great example of what creative writing can do in revealing these types of emotions. And it's a comforting read, actually. So I think that would be helpful for a lot of, like, since your question was more targeted towards like high schoolers, yeah, I would recommend that. Catcher in the Rye. It's like mandatory reading for high schoolers in the U.S., but it became quite controversial in some states. But yeah.
Makes sense. Nigel, thank
Yeah.
you so much for
Thank you.
joining
Thank
us
you very
today,
much. Thank
all
you.
of us, and definitely see you in more episodes as a host or guest. We shall see.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.